Rain lashed the windows. Adam looked up, startled by a ping from his ancient computer. An email, no sender, subject run. His pulse quickened. Spam, probably, but the air felt different, charged with something unknown. He clicked. The message was simple, stark. They're coming, page 42, run. A cold dread spread through him. Page 42 of what? Why run? He searched his apartment, a rising sense of panic tightening his chest. What was he missing? He scanned his bookshelf. Nothing. Then he saw it. An old, leather-bound journal, a relic from his grandfather. He hadn't touched it in years. Hesitantly, he opened it, the musty scent of old paper filling his nostrils. His heart pounded as his eyes fell on page 42. A single line scrawled in his grandfather's shaky hand, time bends to the sum of its parts plus X. What did it mean? He had always known his grandfather to be a man of many secrets, but this cryptic message was unlike anything he had encountered before. The handwriting was almost illegible, as if written in a hurry or under duress. Was this some kind of joke? He reread the email. The subject line was blank, and the body contained only a few words. Look at the journal. They're coming. It was sent from an unknown address, adding to the mystery. He felt a shiver run down his spine as he pondered the implications. They're coming. Who? Why? The questions swirled in his mind, each more unsettling than the last. He tried to recall if his grandfather had ever mentioned anything about this, but his memory was a blur. The urgency in the email was palpable, and he knew he had to act fast. The formula had to be the key. He was certain of it. But how could a simple equation hold the answers to such a profound mystery? He needed to decipher it, and quickly. The more he stared at the formula, the more it seemed to taunt him with its complexity. He stared at the equation, a cold fear creeping up his spine. The numbers and symbols seemed to dance on the page, mocking his inability to understand. He felt a growing sense of dread, as if time itself was running out. The sum of its parts? He repeated the phrase to himself, hoping for a revelation. What parts? What sum? His mind raced through possibilities, each more confusing than the last. He needed to break it down piece by piece. Could it be a date? He wondered aloud. The idea seemed plausible. Dates were sums of days, months, and years. But which date? And what was the significance? He felt like he was grasping at straws. He glanced at the computer clock. 11:47 p.m., November 16th, 2024. The time was ticking away, each second bringing him closer to an unknown fate. He felt a sense of urgency, a need to solve the puzzle before it was too late. He added the year, month, day, hour, minute, still missing something. The X. What could X represent? He racked his brain, trying to think of anything his grandfather might have said or done that could provide a clue. The answer seemed just out of reach. His gaze fell on the journal's title, Reflections on the Nature of Time. Could the answer be hidden within its pages? He quickly flipped through the journal, scanning for anything that might stand out. The pages were filled with notes and musings, but nothing that seemed immediately relevant. Time, of course, seconds. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. The missing piece was time itself, measured in seconds. He quickly did the math, adding the current seconds to the sum he had already calculated. He added the current seconds to the sum. The result was a specific point in time, a moment that seemed to hold some significance. He felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what it meant. The result sent a chill down his spine. It pointed to a date and time that was rapidly approaching. He felt a sense of impending doom, as if the walls were closing in around him. A date. Tomorrow. The realization was both shocking and terrifying. Whatever was coming, it would happen soon. He had little time to prepare, and even less time to understand what he was up against. Suddenly, a loud knock on the door made him jump. His blood ran cold. They were here. The moment he had been dreading had arrived, and he was out of time. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever was to come. He froze, his breath caught in his throat. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. He crept towards the door, every nerve ending on high alert. Peeking through the peephole, he saw a tall, shadowy figure in a fedora and a long coat. The figure's face was obscured by the hat's brim, but Adam could sense his gaze, cold and calculating. He backed away from the door, his mind racing. He had to get out, now. He grabbed his phone and wallet, his hands trembling. The window, it was his only chance. He threw it open, the cold night air hitting him like a slap. As he climbed out onto the fire escape, he heard the sound of splintering wood. They were breaking in. He scrambled down the fire escape, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The alley below was dark and deserted, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. He didn't dare look back. They were right behind him. He ran, his lungs burning, his legs screaming for him to stop. But he couldn't. He had to get away. The message, the formula, the figure at the door. It all pointed to a danger he couldn't even begin to comprehend. He ducked into a side street, hoping to lose himself in the maze of buildings. He risked a glance over his shoulder. No sign of them. But he could still feel their presence, like wolves stalking their prey. Section 5. The chase intensifies. He pushed himself harder, his chest constricting with every breath. He had to find somewhere safe, somewhere to hide. But where? He didn't know who he could trust, who might be involved. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his ankle. He stumbled, falling to the pavement. He tried to get up, but his ankle wouldn't support his weight. He had sprained it. Panic surged through him. He was trapped. He heard the sound of footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. They were getting closer. He looked around frantically for a weapon, anything to defend himself with, but there was nothing. His eyes fell on a small, brightly lit bakery across the street. It seemed like his only hope. Ignoring the searing pain in his ankle, he pulled himself up and limped towards it. He burst through the door, gasping for breath. The smell of warm bread and cinnamon filled the air, a stark contrast to the cold terror that gripped him. A woman behind the counter looked up, startled. "Help me," he choked out. "They're after me." The woman's eyes widened in alarm as she saw the fear etched on his face. Before she could respond, the bell above the door jingled, announcing the arrival of 2 new customers, 2 figures in fedoras and long coats. Adam's blood ran cold. They had found him. He glanced around desperately, but there was nowhere left to run. Thinking fast, he grabbed a notepad and pen from the counter and scribbled a message. Page 42. Times equation. They're dangerous. He thrust the note at the woman, his heart pounding in his chest. "Please," he whispered urgently, "believe me." He knew how crazy it all sounded, but he had to take the chance. Her eyes darted from the note to the men, then back to him. He could see the doubt and fear warring within her. The men approached the counter, their faces obscured by their hats. "Just 2 coffees, please," one of them said, his voice smooth and devoid of emotion. Adam held his breath, willing the woman to understand. The woman hesitated for a moment, her gaze flickering between Adam and the men. Her mind raced, weighing the risks and the consequences of her next move. She knew that one wrong step could spell disaster for both of them. Then, with a subtle nod, she took the note and disappeared into the back room. The note was a lifeline, a desperate plea for help, and she knew she had to act quickly. Every second counted. Adam let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The tension in his chest eased slightly, but the weight of the situation still pressed heavily on his shoulders. He had bought himself some time, but how much? The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. He glanced at his watch, the hands moving agonizingly slow. He sat down at a table, trying to appear casual, but his entire body thrummed with tension. The aroma of freshly baked bread and coffee did little to soothe his nerves. He watched the men from the corner of his eye. Their presence was a constant reminder of the danger he was in. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. They were talking in hushed tones, their eyes constantly scanning the room. Their movements were calculated, their expressions unreadable. They were professionals, and they were on a mission. They knew he was here. The realization sent a shiver down his spine. He had to stay one step ahead, but the odds were stacked against him. Minutes crawled by like hours. The weight was unbearable, each tick of the clock amplifying his anxiety. He tapped his fingers on the table, trying to maintain his composure. The bell above the door jingled again, making him jump. His heart raced as he turned to see who had entered. A delivery boy, no one important. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. He couldn't let his guard down, not even for a moment. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He needed to stay focused, to keep his wits about him. The stakes were too high. He had to trust the woman. She was his only hope, the only one who could help him out of this mess. He had to believe in her. He had to believe that someone would believe his story. The truth was his only weapon, and he clung to it desperately. In this race against time, every second mattered, and he could only hope that help would come before it was too late. Suddenly, the back door burst open and the woman reappeared, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of danger. She had been running, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "They're gone," she whispered, her voice trembling. But the fear in her eyes told a different story. She knew they weren't truly gone, just lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. "I called the police, told them about the men threatening you." Her hand shook as she held the phone, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She hoped the authorities would arrive in time, but deep down, she knew it was a slim chance. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. The gravity of the situation was too immense to allow for any real comfort. He knew that the danger was far from over. "It's too late," he said, his voice heavy with dread. "They're not after me." His eyes met hers, and she saw the truth in them. The realization hit her like a cold wave. They're after something or someone else. His words hung in the air, a chilling reminder of the unknown threat that loomed over them. The shadows seemed to grow darker, more menacing. And the date? It's today. The calendar on the wall confirmed their worst fears. Today was the day everything would change. He looked at the clock on the wall. 11:59 p.m., 1 minute to midnight. 1 minute until... What? The seconds ticked by, each one louder than the last, echoing in the silence of the room. As the clock ticked over to midnight, the lights in the bakery flickered and died. The sudden darkness was suffocating, wrapping around them like a shroud. The world plunged into darkness. Outside, the cityscape was eerily quiet, the usual hum of life replaced by an unsettling silence. And then, everything went silent. The only sound was their own breathing, ragged and fearful. The silence was oppressive, filled with the weight of the unknown. He was out of time. The realization hit him hard, a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. There was no turning back now. There was no escaping the mystery that awaited him, a mystery that stretched from the pages of his grandfather's journal to the unknown future. The journal held secrets, clues to a past long forgotten and a future yet to be written. He knew that the answers he sought were within those pages, but the journey to uncover them would be fraught with danger and uncertainty. The fate that awaited him was inevitable, and he had no choice but to face it head-on.